Здравствуйте, друзья.
Hello friends, my name is Bojan Stanislavski. Today my guest is Vladimir Valerievich Bukharski. Welcome, Vladimir.
Good afternoon.
Welcome to our studio on the air of Bulgarian, Polish and Eastern European independent media. We are meeting here in Sofia. I know you are here on business, and I also know very well that you have a lot of commitments. That is why I would especially like to thank you for finding the time to talk with us about the situation in Moldova. And this is very important because in Bulgaria, in general, no one says anything about Moldova other than the official Euro-Atlantic propaganda. Practically no one here knows about the situation from the perspective of the dominant political sentiments in Moldovan society. All we are told is that Moldova is on the path toward the European Union, toward the West, and ultimately toward NATO. That this path will enable Moldova to defend itself from Russia, which, as we know, is now presented as the main enemy of humanity. And so, first of all, I would like to ask you to tell us, in general terms, what exactly the political situation in Moldova is today. We literally have just 4 weeks left until the parliamentary elections on September 28th. And as far as I understood from our conversation before recording, these elections will be extremely important, correct?
They say that every election is historic. It's such a cliche, but these elections are truly historic, without quotation marks, because Moldova is a parliamentary republic. All power is concentrated in the parliament and the government. The president has power only insofar as he or she has strong support in parliament. But what happened now? In 2020, Mrs. Maia Sandu became the president of Moldova, winning the elections amid protests and discontent with restrictive COVID measures, under slogans of fighting corruption, of change, of renewal. People believed her. People were tired of the old politicians, and they trusted her. An honest woman, as she called herself, saying, "What evil could possibly come from 45 kilograms of weight?" Well, now we see what evil could come, because this woman, having secured a majority and having the absolute backing of the collective West, purely for conjunctural reasons, because the West has set itself the goal of containing Russia at any cost. As the saying goes, there's no beast scarier than a cat, at least for mice and rats, as we understand. For the West, nothing is scarier than Russia itself. And such people as Zelensky, Maia Sandu, and certain well-known Bulgarian politicians, I won't list names from the GERB party, we know them, all of them serve just one purpose, to harm Russia as much as possible. They have no other goals. So what did Sandu do? With full support from the West, solely to cause Russia as much trouble as possible, she managed to establish an absolutely dictatorial regime. She concentrated everything in her hands: parliament, presidency, government, the security apparatus. The Central Electoral Commission is entirely under her control, as is the Constitutional Court. She has completely purged the media space, not only from alternative viewpoints, but also from any inconvenient journalists who might ask her difficult questions or criticize her actions in any way.
So, a dictatorship, a soft one, perhaps one might say.
Everyone may choose their own words, but in all political science disciplines, in all political science textbooks, any student would say, this is a dictatorship in the classic sense. One might call it a banana dictatorship, a pro-Western dictatorship. A dictatorship fully supported by the collective West and sold to the world as, from the West's point of view, a liberal, progressive regime.
How did she manage to achieve this? How did she manage to build this institutional authoritarianism? If Maia Sandu and the political cartel she leads in Moldova, how did they accomplish this? What did they do to seize power so completely?
Slowly, gradually, step by step. First, amid the COVID pandemic and mass protests, she won the presidential elections because people were tired of restrictions, of mask mandates. The main scapegoat was the former president Igor Dodon, and then came a video showing the former oligarch and shadow ruler of Moldova, Vlad Plahotniuc, allegedly offering Dodon a kulek, some kind of black plastic bag, during a meeting. Nobody ever knew what was inside that bag, but afterward...
Just to add, Vladimir was a very powerful oligarch. For those who aren't familiar with the political scene,
the shadow ruler who used absolutely every lever of power. But even under him, there wasn't such absolute lawlessness as under Sandu. Even then, criticism of him was tolerated. Alternative viewpoints were tolerated. Now, none of that exists. Now the media sphere is overseen by the so-called Coordinating Council on Broadcasting, also known as the Audiovisual Council. They managed to ban the broadcasting of all opposition channels, to the point where they even used such an absurd concept. I always say this and people laugh, they think I'm telling a joke, but the official formula was propaganda through silence.
This is completely Orwellian absurd.
In other words, TV channels that don't cover the war in Ukraine enough, that don't talk enough about the atrocities of the Russian army, about missile strikes, if a channel pays more attention to Moldovan domestic issues instead of repeating how bad Russia is, then that channel is accused of spreading Russian propaganda through silence.
Was this official?
Yes, it was officially stated by the head of the Coordinating Council for Broadcasting CSTR, and this became the reason for shutting down a whole series of TV channels, 11 channels in total. This happened in 2023.
In 2023, meaning after the beginning of the so-called special military operation?
Yes. First of all, they shut down the broadcasting of all Russian TV channels, cooking shows, health programs, TV series. Everything was shut down. If you're making dumplings, you're already participating in Putin's propaganda, apparently through culinary art. As the saying goes, it would be funny if it weren't so sad. And then one after another, they moved on to purge all unwanted TV channels, all unwanted media. And now the situation is such that Sandu and her circle have monopolized the entire media market, both the media space and, as a result, the entire domestic political process. There isn't a single channel left today that presents even remotely objective viewpoints. If any channel dares not to praise Sandu or dares to criticize her even slightly, they immediately receive a massive fine from the CSTR. The fines are so large that channels simply can't afford them. It's easier for them to shut down than to face this machine of totalitarian suppression of dissent.
Tell me, in these fines, what is written as the justification? I imagine it doesn't say because you criticized Sandu.
It says spreading fake news. So the fight against fake news simply serves as an instrument of enforcing dictatorship. Violations are often absurd, like failing to present an alternative viewpoint, and the few channels that remain, occasionally someone might interview an opposition figure, but you should see the state of those poor journalists. For example, there's a journalist, Radika Kravchenko. When she interviews Dodon, her pupils are dilated with fear. She is literally afraid to say the wrong word. She apologizes after every sentence. It's heartbreaking to watch journalists who should simply be doing their professional job, bringing information to people.
All right, and you, as a Moldovan opposition figure, a socialist, what media tools do you still have left, if any? Because as I understand it, the opposition media have already been shut down. How do you manage to spread your party's message, your organization's opinions, your friends' positions?
Exclusively through hand-to-hand distribution, newspapers, leaflets, informational materials, or through social networks, TikTok, Telegram. These are not yet banned, but Sandu's team is openly discussing banning Telegram and TikTok in Moldova, allegedly because these platforms are used to spread fakes, propaganda, even calls to terrorism. And so the demand to ban social networks is being openly voiced. Take Facebook, for example. If people post a text, immediately they receive a warning. Independent experts believe this information is inaccurate. Facebook sends you a warning. After a few such warnings, Facebook either blocks your account or deletes it altogether. I personally had 2 accounts deleted.
So you're already a veteran.
Of course.
Tell me, aside from these social networks and the printed materials you distribute, what kind of feedback do you get from people when you talk to them as socialists, as politicians in Moldova? How do people tolerate all this?
Naturally, we speak with our neighbors daily in shops, in queues, with taxi drivers. That's how we communicate. And we see the real mood of the people. Our party, the Socialists, also hold events called Single Political Day. Once a week, on Saturday, party activists go out to the streets, to intersections, outside supermarkets with bundles of newspapers, simply to talk to people and hear what they think. And lately, over the past year, the past months, we see nothing but furious hatred toward this team. They chose yellow as their party color. People call them yellow mold, yellow vomit. Those are the kindest words.
So this isn't you calling them that, but ordinary people?
Exactly, this is what people we meet regularly say. Sandu provokes massive hatred among her own people. Sandu really only has two categories of supporters left. The first is what we call the sect of the witnesses of Sandu. These are people who still believe in the holy, immaculate Maia. This woman, now 53, has never had a husband or children. That's her choice. I don't want to dwell on it. But one would think such a person might show more sensitivity to families. Instead, during her rule, we've seen some of the most outrageous court sentences. For example, 7 years in prison for Evgenia Gusul, the Bashkan of Gagozia, a young woman, mother of 2 children, over some alleged 5-year-old case of electoral corruption. A case that, according to every independent lawyer and expert, is completely fabricated. But Sandu's aim was to remove this political figure from the chessboard, and they went so far as to issue this unprecedentedly harsh sentence.
Tell me, why such repression from Maia Sandu? Evgenia Gutsul was a popular regional politician, but beyond that, how do politicians like her or like your party's leaders actually threaten Sandu's political existence?
They threaten Sandu simply by casting doubt on her power, on her ability to rule, on her team's competence. And there has never been a more incompetent government in all 30 years of Moldova's independence. This again exposes the myth of the Soros Foundation as a school of cadres. Because these are people who live off grants, who file reports, who split funding, but who know nothing else in life. They don't understand how the economy works, how industry works, how the social sphere works. They think money grows on trees, that bread grows on trees, that industry functions simply because smoke rises from a chimney. And these people, tragically, for an entire republic, an entire country, have received monopoly control of power.
I understand. Now, in terms of social support, you have a very critical view of Sandu's team and of this Euro-Atlantic cartel. But surely there are social groups that do support them. If we look at the elections, which social, national or cultural groups support Sandu and which groups support the opposition?
Sandu is supported almost exclusively by this sect of the witnesses of Saint Immaculate Maia. These are mostly grant receivers, people dependent on Western NGOs. One author, Bogdan Sirdea, even wrote a study, a whole book titled NGOcracy in Moldova, where he lists around 14,000 NGOs. And Moldova is not a large country. So you have this whole class of social dependents living on foreign grants. That's one group. The second group is the Russophobic academic and artistic intelligentsia. These are people convinced that all of Moldova's problems come from proximity to Russia, that Russia is the great evil. And yet it was Russia that built Moldova's universities, theaters, factories, power plants, but they dismiss all of it as if it would have sprung from the ground anyway. They also resent Moldova's Orthodox faith, which shaped the Moldovan people for centuries. Without Orthodoxy, there would be no Moldovan nation. And they resent their historical closeness with Russia. And yet, one of Moldova's medieval enlighteners, Metropolitan Dosofte, wrote in a letter after Moscow had funded a library and printing press in Iași, then the Moldavian capital. The light comes to us from Moscow, shining with warm rays and a good name under the sun. Another group of Sandu supporters is the European diaspora, Moldovans who left because of poverty went to work in Europe. There they wash people's behinds, then come back home with money, considering themselves important. Mari Branza, as we say, a big shot with cash from abroad. They act as a reference group for their relatives, people whose voices carry weight, and among them European governments have helped create aggressively pro-Western lobbies, but these are dependent people. At any moment, they could be expelled from abroad, and they know it. That's why when they come to vote, they know they must vote exactly as told. Another group is villagers from central Moldova and the suburbs of Chisinau, who were taught that Soviet rule came not to build factories or develop the country, but only to impose collectivization, deportations, famine. They've even built museums out of freight cars in Chisinau displayed as deportation exhibits, even though the wagons are modern, not from that era. Meanwhile, under Sandu, Moldova's real railroads have been destroyed. The national airline Air Moldova bankrupted. But these wagons are now treated as national shrines. They even use Holocaust photos, Auschwitz photos, even photos of Japanese deportations in America, presenting them as Soviet crimes, constant falsification, lie upon lie. They even made cartoons for children about deportations. Sandu once invited families with kids to her residence, where children were shown animated films about the horrors of the communist regime. Later, they produced a film called Siberia on Bones, built entirely on distortions. And the Ministry of Education, headed by a 32-year-old Soros protege, forced teachers to show it to children in schools.
A very interesting situation you have. Please tell me, these groups that you have just described, do they support Sandu? And who is in the opposition?
Well, in the opposition, a significant part of the population. This is the older generation, pensioners from whom the last piece of bread and the ability to buy medicine are being taken away. These are workers from closed enterprises, even enterprises that the Germans had opened here. Even now the Germans are forced to close them because such conditions are being created, including the price of gas, that it is simply impossible to work. These are also the farmers. During the COVID pandemic, they supported Sandu, they organized demonstrations, they drove tractors into Chisinau, blocked the entire city center with tractors, rammed tractors into the government building. In this way, they achieved the resignation of the then Prime Minister, Ion Cicu, and now Moldova's agricultural sector, though this was once one of the richest republics of the Soviet Union, which was always famous for its agro-industry, its wines, its fruit and vegetable produce. Now in Moldovan supermarkets, the potatoes are Dutch, the onions too. Exactly as I said, everything today is imported. Tomatoes, Turkish, bananas, Ecuadorian.
Besides these people, there is, as I understand, also a serious opposition from the Gagauz.
Yes.
And as I understand, also from the Bessarabian Bulgarians.
Not only the Gagauz and Bulgarians, but also ethnic Ukrainians who live with us in the north. They do not support the militant course of Zelensky. And they do not support Sandu's course aimed at dragging Moldova into war. That is a significant part of Moldovan society, Moldovans, Gagauz, Bulgarians, Ukrainians. None of them want destabilization, none of them want to be drawn into this hatred. But speaking of the Gagauz and Bulgarians, it must be said that these two peoples are grateful to Russia, because Russia saved them from genocide. In the 19th century, when Turkey, sensing its collapse, went down the path of extermination. It was the Russian imperial government that allocated lands in southern Bessarabia to shelter these peoples. One of these figures was General Inzov, a friend of Pushkin, who hosted Pushkin in Chisinau during his exile. The local Bessarabian Bulgarians respected and loved him so much that when he died in Odessa, the Bulgarians carried his coffin by hand for hundreds of kilometers to the burial place. And these peoples, the Gagauz and the Bulgarians, remember what Russia did for them. They remember thanks to whom they survived. They remember that it was precisely the Soviet army in 1990 that did not allow bloodshed and massacre in the south, when Mircea Druk's government had already gathered buses with drunken criminals in the center of Chisinau to send them to slaughter Gagauz and Bulgarians. This action was called the March on Comrat, and only thanks to the intervention of the Soviet army and the Volgograd division was this massacre stopped. Perhaps precisely for this reason, Sandu understands that she will never have support from either the Gagauz or the Bulgarians living in Moldova. Precisely against these two peoples, she applies the harshest measures.
What was the official guilt of Evgenia Gutul, the Bashkan of the Gagauz, that she was simply thrown into prison? And how long do you think she will remain there? In your opinion, will she be imprisoned for 7 to 8 years, as the court said?
I don't know how long she will sit there, but the very fact of her imprisonment was such a pitiful, low revenge of Sandu against a woman who is younger than her, perhaps prettier or more successful than her. This was precisely political revenge. In the person of Evgenia Gutul, it was revenge against all Gagauz who vote wrongly, who behave wrongly, who dared to contradict Sandu during her visit, because in Gagauzia they booed her, asked uncomfortable questions to which she, due to her narrow-mindedness, could not answer.
Officially, what is Gutul guilty of?
Of electoral corruption, that is allegedly through her illegal financing of the Ilan Shor party was carried out, and this illegal financing, a case opened 5 years ago or so, according to the prosecutors and judges, is in fact the whim of Sandu. And the prosecutors and judges fully understand that if they deliver a different verdict, they will be removed.
And what about the Bulgarians? I mean, are there also attempts there to introduce some criminal element into these repressions?
Toward the Bulgarians, they try to act more softly. They try to separate the unruly Gagauz from the Bulgarians, so as not to disgrace themselves in front of the Bulgarian ambassadors who represent the EU and NATO, but often fail to notice the real problems of the local Bulgarian population. But in Sandu's view, the Bulgarian-speaking Taraklia district is the same problem as Gagauzia, because Taraklia also votes wrongly. Taraklia also votes against Sandu and against the pro-Western figures in every election. One of them, a figure of the Taraklia district and the Bulgarian community, Vyacheslav Lupov, was elected mayor of the district center Taraklia. Unfortunately, in Sandu's opinion, he was connected to the party led by Ilan Shor, and now, like everyone who had any relation to this political formation, he is accused of the same electoral corruption. And this hatred is provoked against the entire population of Taraklia, which is accused of being bought and sold. That is, there is a defamation campaign against the local Bulgarian community. The ethnic Bulgarians living in Taraklia are forced to listen to all this directed at them. Not to mention that both Bulgarians and Gagauz are forced in schools to study courses in history of the Romanians. In our country, there is no course history of Moldova, as in every country. Officially, the course history of the Romanians is taught, and people are instilled, starting from kindergarten and school, that the only rightful owners of this land are the Romanians.
That is, there is a war against Moldovan identity.
Yes, there is a war against Moldovan identity. What did they do? They removed from the constitution the mention of the Moldovan language as the state language, and they replaced the Moldovan language in the constitution with Romanian. In fact, they are instilling in Moldovans the idea that they have no national language of their own, that their language is actually Romanian. And the next step will be the claim that there are no Moldovans as a distinct people either, just Romanians.
Tell me, please, why are they even doing this? I mean, what is the explanation? Does it mean that Moldovan identity are also some sort of Russian invention?
Yes, that's exactly what they say. That Moldovans and Moldovan identity were invented by the Tsarist government and later by Stalin. That it was in the Soviet Union under Stalin's leadership that the Moldovan language was artificially created. And this was being said literally right after they carried out their color revolution in 2009 and seized power. During that revolution, there were such figures who burned down their own parliament and their own presidential palace, and at that time they shouted, "We don't need either parliament or presidential palace or constitution. We already have all of that in Romania." And now Sandu and her henchmen call this a revolution. Just like in Ukraine, the so-called revolution of dignity, which completely destroyed Ukraine. In the same way, for us, these outrages of April 7th, 2009, when according to the church calendar it was the feast of the Annunciation of the Most Holy Mother of God, for us there took place such outrages, such barbaric events, which the current official regime calls a revolution, and they celebrate this event as a revolution.
So, one could say that the current regime, or Euro-Atlantic dictatorship or authoritarianism, is also a direct or indirect result of that color revolution which was carried out in 2009, correct?
Yes, to a large extent it is the result of that revolution. Through that revolution, the consciousness of an entire generation of young people was deformed. Those who went through that revolution, through those riots, are, intellectually and mentally speaking, already disabled. These are people who came to believe that the lawlessness of riots is normal, that through such riots and pogroms one can change the government they don't like. But I do not want to say that the whole of Moldovan society was deformed in this way, because after 2009 there followed a whole series of electoral campaigns in which, in many elections, state-oriented, democratic, patriotic, pro-Moldovan forces won. In particular, Igor Dodon was elected president in 2016. And he took a number of steps to establish Moldova as a proper entity in the eyes of all its neighbors. But after that, many events occurred, such as the COVID-19 pandemic, which also deformed the consciousness of very many, and deformed the consciousness of the elites, who decided that now everything was permitted to them, up to and including the creation of an electronic concentration camp. And then the military actions in Ukraine began. A truly immense tragedy, which was entirely provoked by the collective West.
Therefore, regarding what you just said about the SMO, I think if everything is indeed going exactly as we were told here, is there a possibility that after an attempt to eliminate, let's put it this way, the autonomy of the Gagauz, there will also be an attempt to eliminate the Transnistrian autonomy? And would this then, one might say, become a front of war with Russia, the collective West on Moldovan territory, or not? Is this an exaggeration?
They have long been itching, including the Kiev regime, to liquidate Transnistria completely, yet it was precisely under Dodon, during Dodon's presidency, that a number of steps were taken to build trust between the two banks of the Dniester. There was even an oral agreement with the then Minister of Defense, Shoigu, on the withdrawal of the weapons of the 14th Army from Transnistria. But when the military actions in Ukraine began, Zelensky and his associates repeatedly suggested that Sandu personally appeal to him so that they would gain the opportunity to invade Transnistria and completely liquidate it. It should nevertheless be mentioned that Moldovan society does not want to fight. Moldovans are a peaceful people.
But you know how it goes in international politics. It could happen.
There is a well-known saying about the First World War. Nobody wanted the war, yet the war was inevitable.
And please tell us a bit more about the situation in Transnistria, because this is also a topic that is not discussed at all in Europe, especially in Eastern Europe. How does this issue stand today? Is there really a functioning autonomy there, and in what way is it supported by Russia?
Transnistria has existed as an unrecognized, self-proclaimed republic since 1992. A whole generation of people has been born and raised there who identify themselves as Transnistrians, as part of the Russian world, as part of the common civilizational space with Russia. Although there have been attempts, including by Russia, to resolve the Transnistrian issue. Let us recall Dmitry Kozak's mission in November 2003, when the American ambassador literally pressured former President Voronin with a late-night phone call, and at the last moment he refused to sign that memorandum because the West did not want to allow this territory to come under any kind of Russian control. In that case, the country would already have been united for 22 years, and this Transnistrian conflict would no longer exist. We would have even forgotten about this conflict. But it so happens that in Moldova's relations with regional authorities, in Moldova's relations with Transnistria, there is always some extra player interfering, the collective West, which sets its own rules of the game. There is, after all, such an expression that Western leaders, especially in Biden's era, like to use, an order based on rules. Although no one knows what those are, not a single lawyer in the world can define them. Show me that lawyer. Show me the text where at least someone in some scholarly article has substantiated these rules. No one can substantiate them. Nevertheless, the West pushes this line of an order supposedly based on rules to which everyone must allegedly submit. Perhaps this is simply the right of the strong, the right of the victor in the Cold War, as the West imagines itself. They say, stop living in the past. In the West there is this common phrase for everyone: you live with myths of the past, you are nostalgic for the past. But in fact it is the West that lives with the myths of that grim past, of those grim events connected with the Cold War, with the confrontation of the two systems.
Tell us also, in what way does Russia support Transnistria? Is there some reason why official Moldova, let us say, has not yet attacked Transnistria? And I think there is such a possibility that simply the collective West might eventually open a second front on Moldovan territory through Transnistria, as is being done in Azerbaijan and the Caucasus. And I also believe this is very dangerous for Russia, because we saw what happened in Syria, where Russia won the war, but one could say lost the peace.
It was through the efforts of its peacekeepers that Russia stopped the bloodshed in Transnistria in June 1992. General Alexander Lebed, now deceased, was sent to this region, and he simply declared that whoever fired the next shot would face the full might of the Russian army. He is also credited with the statement, "I will have breakfast in Tiraspol, lunch in Chisinau, and dinner in Bucharest." And this statement, these words, had their effect. They played a role. Back in 1992, an agreement was signed on the principles of resolving the territorial conflict, and thanks to this agreement of 1992, for more than 30 years peace has existed in this region, with not a single shot heard, and the collective West, in the face of the neoconservatives, John Bolton and other figures, has since the 2000s tried to advance the ideology of unfreezing frozen conflicts. We saw one example of such an unfreezing in the war of August 8, 2008 in South Ossetia, when there was the same kind of half-mad leader, Saakashvili, who decided to trust the collective West. If someone out there now wants to play with fire, I still very much hope for the wisdom of the Moldovan people, who do not want war, and for the instinct of self-preservation of the Moldovan elite, who understand what hatred from the people would arise against them if they unleashed such a military conflict. And it is only thanks to this that, up to now, the Sandu regime has not gone down this disastrous path.
Well then, tell us finally, how can one resist this regime? How can one enter into a successful confrontation with it? What can be done at all to support the Moldovan opposition in the sense of democratic processes that still exist in some form in Moldova through elections?
As one of the heroes of an American film who also saves the world from the same kind of totalitarian electronic dictatorship of the future once said, I ask, what is to be done? To vote. That is, people must go to the polls and vote. There is no other way. And one must understand that it is possible to falsify 1,000 or 2,000 votes, but it is impossible to falsify elections at every polling station. As one expression goes, you can fool a small number of people forever. You can fool everyone for a few years, but you cannot fool everyone forever. People have already woken up. People have already realized that the Queen is naked. You can no longer put the toothpaste back into the tube. Society has awakened.
Do you think that no amount of repression will help Sandu and the Euro-Atlantists in the long run?
It will not help, because many people are tired of being afraid. Yes, many are under pressure. At work they are told that if they are seen at an opposition rally, they will immediately be fired, that their family will have no means of subsistence. So people are afraid. But people are already tired of this fear. And now this effect begins, when people simply wave their hand and say, it cannot get worse. These ones are already unbearable. Something must be done. And I still hope that people will turn out en masse at these elections as an act of protest, as an act of conscience, as a calling. And this hatred that has already accumulated among the people, they will express it simply by going to the polling stations and voting against this regime.
And when they go to vote, they have such a choice, either to vote for Sandu and her team or for your party or your coalition. Tell us a little about this coalition you have now created to take part in these parliamentary elections on September 28th.
Two ex-presidents have entered this coalition, Vladimir Voronin and Igor Dodon. One might say that there may be some questions about Voronin, but his presidency from 2001 to 2009 was the most peaceful. Igor Dodon in those years was Minister of Economy. After that he became president and tried to make Moldova truly an independent state in the real sense, open to everyone. In this same team is the former Bashkan of Gagauzia, Irina Vla, who served 2 terms. By the way, she has many ethnic Bulgarians from the Taraklia district in her team. Into this same team came the former Prime Minister Vasile Tarlev, who also has in his team ethnic Bulgarians, ethnic Gagauz, in other words, representatives not only of them but of all layers of society. These are people whose merit lies not in reports to Western grant givers, but in building the real economy of the country. That is, they truly know how production works, how the agrarian sector works, how gas contracts with Russia work, because, as we have already found out, there is no and will not be an alternative to Russian gas for Moldova. And these people have already proven in practice that they can manage the economy, they can govern the country, they can solve complex economic problems. By taking this step, these people overcame their personal difficulties in relations. In other words, they reassembled the team, the very team that was in power in Moldova during its most peaceful, calm and successful period from 2001 to 2009.
And what is the main postulate, the main program point of your coalition? Your participation in the elections against Sandu. What the people should vote for?
For sovereignty, for neutrality, for the statehood of Moldova, for decisions to be made not in Brussels but in Chisinau, for decisions to be made by the people and not by foreign officials who come here and have the audacity to dictate to us what is good and what is bad, for putting at the forefront not geopolitics, not following one or another imposed model, but the economy and the well-being of ordinary people, so that people engage in economic development and not in the tiresome geopolitical slogans.
Suppose it turns out that your coalition wins the elections and you have a prime minister. What would be the first 3 steps to begin changing the current situation in Moldova?
The most important step is to address Russia and Ukraine with a proposal to use Chisinau as a place for permanent dialogue and reconciliation between the warring countries. That is, Moldova has a chance to play its main role in stopping this conflict. The second step is to go to Russia and renew a long-term contract for the delivery of Russian gas to Moldova, thereby restoring Moldova's economy and industry. And the third step is to begin implementing the program of economic revival of Moldova, which the Socialist Party in particular presented, and on which the best Moldovan economists worked under the leadership of former Prime Minister Zinaida Greceanu. We have the text of this economic program.
Very well. Thank you very much, Vladimir Valerievich, for this interview, and I wish you good luck.
Thank you. To you as well.